I've been absolutely dying to have a go on one of the new Indian FTR1200s, and finally this week I got round to taking one out from Krazy Horse London. It's one of the most original looking road bikes of the last few years, with its flat tracker styling influenced by their FTR750 race bike. It has the signature big wheels with a 19-incher at the front and an 18 at the rear, a stubby tail section aided by a swing arm mounted license plate holder. The shape of the mock fuel tank is unmistakably an Indian, and there are plenty of nice finishing touches like the LED headlight and shroud and the illuminated Indian logo in the tail light. But it's not just trading on the novelty of its flat track looks, it has the specs to back it up too. 120 horsepower puts it at the higher end of the retro bike spectrum, and there's plenty of torque on tap too, with the 1200cc liquid-cooled 60-degree V-twin capable of 88 foot-pounds or 120 Nm at 6,000 RPM. Suspension is fully adjustable on this S model with 43mm upside-down forks and an external reservoir shock, both with 150mm of travel. Brakes are totally top spec with twin radially mounted monoblock Brembo 4-pot calipers on 320mm discs at the front, actuated from a Brembo radial master cylinder with steel braided lines for an extra sharp feel. There's also Brembo P34 at the rear. In terms of electronics, there are some modern touches with a 4.3-inch display that includes phone connectivity, and it's also there that you can administer 3 riding modes of sport, standard and rain, all of which affect throttle response and lean sensitive traction control and ABS owing to a 6-axis Bosch IMU. Its 231kg weight isn't necessarily light, but it does have an underseat fuel tank which helps to keep its mass low. So it's all quite performance orientated, but initial reviews said that it's an aggressive ride and that the semi-knobbly flat track inspired tyres designed by Dunlop specifically for this bike can struggle for grip with all that power and torque, yet a relatively narrow section of 150mm at the rear. So I was keen to find out whether the FTR is genuinely a bit of a handful, especially on our less than perfect UK roads, or is it just one of those bikes you need a bit of time to gel with? I mean, it's not a total hooligan. On the ride out here on the motorway, it was not that bad at all. The position is a little bit of a hybrid, so these bars have quite a decent amount of rise on them, something like you would see on a scrambler, maybe like a Triumph Street Scrambler or something like that. And of course they've got a decent width to them, as you can see, but then the foot pegs are definitely more on the sporty side. I rode a CB1000R to Krazy Horse to pick this up, which I'm borrowing from Honda at the moment, and you know that's like a naked fireblade, so that has quite tucked up foot pegs, and this felt quite similar actually getting onto this. They've definitely gone for a sporty feel with the foot peg position, so it's a little bit of both. I mean, the bars, they're so high up you feel like you could almost stand up like an adventure bike until you do stand up, and then you realize just how high those pegs are and that you have to reach forward for the bars. But it's not too uncomfortable. The seat is also pitched up a little bit as well, just to get you further forward and in that more sporty position. But I actually found it reasonably comfortable for the 10-15 minutes of motorway riding that I did to get out here. It does vibe a bit, and you can primarily feel that through the seat. The grips and pegs aren't too bad, but there's definitely some vibrations in the bum, and I think that's because they've gone for that sporting saddle. It's not got a lot of padding. But honestly, if you're buying a bike like this to do loads of motorway miles, then really you've got to be taking a long, hard look in the wing mirror and questioning your life choices, because that's absolutely not what this bike's about. I mean, it does have cruise control though, and this is super important to me. I've had an Africa Twin from Honda recently, a Goldwing, both have cruise control, and it's on the right hand switch gear, so you have to get up to, let's say you want to cruise at 70, get up to 75, while you let go of the throttle and reach over, because it's quite a decent stretch over to the cruise control buttons. Indian have seen sense, as I hope many of the motorcycle manufacturers will, and put it on the left hand switch gear, and it's within easy reach there. Look, you don't have to stretch at all. Also, the screen is decent. It's not the biggest. There's definitely a trend towards 6-7 inch screens at the moment, but bigger's not always better. I mean, I used to have one of those massive iPhone Plus models, and sometimes I wished for a smaller phone. In fact, I traded back for a smaller one, and I think that's the case here. A 7-inch dash on a bike like this that's quite minimal at the front end would look a little bit daft. So I'm glad they've gone for something smaller. It doesn't need a lot of display space either, because I don't think there's like sat-nav or anything built into this. You've just got the riding information, which is what you'd normally be looking at, and then you've got some setting screens for the riding modes, and you can also pair your phone for music, I think, and taking calls. But ultimately there's nothing super complex in there that needs lots of screen space. It purred along nicely on the motorway. The engine feels completely under stressed by cruising at 70 or 80, but ultimately the vibes coming through the seat would probably put me off doing massive trips on it. This bike's made for hammering down back lanes though. It does feel pretty raw. When I first got on it, the previous person that had ridden it had left it in sport mode, and just pulling away from the shop, I was rocking around as I was getting used to the clutch and the throttle. It does have a firm ride, but I think that's what people who would buy this bike are looking for, because they want the handling. And of course those Brembos are excellent. You've got the Brembo radial master cylinder, braided lines, and then those two big radial Brembos up front. The initial bite isn't too aggressive, but of course with a setup like that, on a bike like this, you've got all the stopping power you'll ever need. And then you've got this big V-twin, 120 horsepower, loads of torque. You know, it all marries up: the firm ride, the powerful braking, that sporty position in the seat and the pegs, and then plenty of power on tap to drive out the corners. You know, there's plenty in the mid-range if you just want to ride at a moderate pace, but bang it down into second and then pick up the revs, and oh my god, it goes. Whoa! Playing around with the modes, I put it into rain to see if that power delivery was a bit smoother, certainly around the traffic just as I was getting away from London, and it felt too docile, I think, in rain mode. Took too long to pick up. Sport certainly felt too choppy, but I've been riding it in the standard riding mode, and that seems like a good compromise for me. I'd love to hear this engine with a louder pipe on. Krazy Horse let me demo a Scout Bobber recently that had Jekyll and Hyde exhaust, which are where you can press a button located on the bars and it'll open a butterfly valve, and it's pretty much straight through when it's open, and that sounded incredible. So if that setup on a Indian water-cooled V-twin sounds good, then I'm sure something similar on this bike would sound good. Akropovich make an official accessory for this bike, and almost certainly you'll get plenty of people buying that. A couple of times I've felt the back end squirming just with that relatively narrow 150 section, semi-knobbly flat track style tyre. Even in standard mode there's enough to get it moving around, but you've just got to learn where its limits are, I guess, and that's part of the fun of this bike. It's unusual, and there are plenty of other 1200-ish cc naked bikes that are more predictable than this, that you can just get on and ride exactly how you expect them to ride. But that's a big part of the allure of a bike like this: the way it's designed, the configuration, the way it looks, and the way it rides are all distinct from the market, let's say. It presents a bit of a challenge, and that's all part of the fun of motorcycling. Indian make plenty of comfortable bikes, loads of them, so why would they make this compromised? If you want an Indian that's just built to go, then this is the bike. Woo! Oh, got that back end squirming. Thank you so much to Krazy Horse London for lending me their demo bike for the day. If you're local and you'd like to try it out for yourself, then I'm sure they'd be more than happy to oblige if you drop them a line. It's a bike that you need to spend a bit of time on to fully appreciate, but by the time I handed it back, I'd thoroughly enjoyed myself. It's beefy and powerful, it handles and stops well, but more than anything, it's unlike any other bike on the market.